I remember how the evening light slipped through the tall windows of my mother's garden room that night, soft and golden, the kind of light that makes everything seem gentler than it truly is. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and champagne, laughter rising above the clink of glasses. I stood near the edge of it all, holding a small plate of hors d'oeuvres I never touched, watching my family move through the crowd as if they owned every inch of the space. Sarah, my younger sister, shone at the center of it, her engagement ring catching the light each time she lifted her hand to brush back her hair. People drifted toward her the way they always had, drawn effortlessly to the brightness she carried. I didn't mind standing back. I had grown used to it years ago, the way a person grows accustomed to a low, constant hum running beneath their life. My mother had planned the party with the precision of someone staging a small military operation. Every detail was chosen to announce that Sarah was finally stepping into the life she was meant for. White linens, crystal flutes, a string quartet tucked discreetly into a corner, playing something soft and triumphant. She had invited everyone who mattered in her carefully curated world, neighbors who mingled in the same circles, old college friends who still sent Christmas cards featuring their perfect children, and a handful of local politicians who liked to be seen at gatherings like this. And then there was Jack Sterling, Sarah's fiancé, tall and broad-shouldered in his civilian suit, which somehow still looked like it wanted to be a uniform. He shook hands with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly how impressive he was meant to be. People kept calling him a hero, whispering the word like a prayer, because he was a Navy SEAL and the news had run stories about his team a couple of years back. Blurred faces, dramatic footage, the kind that made everyone feel safer in their beds at night. I had arrived late on purpose, slipping in through the side door once most of the guests were already there. I wore the plain navy dress I reserved for family occasions, nothing that would draw attention. My mother noticed me almost immediately anyway. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction before her smile returned, bright and practiced. She pulled me into a quick hug that smelled like her usual perfume, something expensive and floral, then steered me toward a small cluster of her friends with the air of someone completing an unpleasant but necessary chore. "This is my older daughter, Evelyn," she said, her voice taking on that familiar tone she always used when introducing me. It was a blend of apology and dismissal, wrapped neatly in politeness. "She works in IT for the Navy, keeps the computers running, that sort of thing." The women nodded kindly, their smiles sympathetic, as if she'd just confessed I spent my days alphabetizing files in a basement somewhere. I smiled back, murmured something about how rewarding the work was, and let the moment pass, just as I had let so many moments pass before. It wasn't that I hated the lie, exactly. I had chosen it, built it carefully over the years, layer upon layer, until it fit like a second skin. When people asked what I did, I told them I managed networks, troubleshot systems, made sure the servers stayed cool and happy. It was true enough in its narrow way. My teams did all of that and more. It just left out the parts that mattered. It left out the classified briefings at 0300, the decisions that shifted satellites and neutralized threats before most people ever knew they existed. The weight of knowing a single miscalculation on my watch could cost lives halfway around the world. I had risen quietly, deliberately, through ranks most people didn't even know existed, until the stars on my shoulder boards were real and heavy and mine. Rear Admiral Evelyn Carter, Director of Cyber Warfare for Naval Intelligence. But to my mother and to Sarah, I was still the dependable, slightly dull older sister, the one who had chosen a safe government job and never quite managed to shine. Sarah had always been the one who shone. She was 37 now, 3 years younger than me, with the kind of beauty that made strangers stop her on the street to tell her she should model. She had turned that gift into a career in public relations, a life full of charity galas and magazine profiles. Our mother adored her for it, the way she adored anything that reflected well on the family name. I didn't resent Sarah, not really. Resentment takes energy, and I had learned long ago to save mine for things that mattered. but I felt the distance between us like a quiet ache sometimes, the way you notice the space where a tooth used to be. We grew up in the same house, shared the same bedrooms for years, yet somewhere along the way our paths had split so completely that we barely spoke the same language anymore. She talked about influencers and brand partnerships. I couldn't tell her about the nights I spent watching data streams that determined whether a submarine surfaced or stayed hidden. So instead, we talked about the weather, or Mom's garden, or whether I was seeing anyone. Always that question, gentle but pointed, as if being single at 41 were the final proof that I had somehow missed the point of life. That night, my mother found her moment shortly after Jack arrived. He had been delayed by some last-minute duty call, and when he finally walked in, the room shifted toward him the same way it had shifted toward Sarah earlier. My mother practically floated across the floor to greet him, kissing both cheeks like they were old European royalty, then turning to the room with her champagne glass raised. "Everyone," she called, her voice warm and commanding, "I want you all to meet Jack Sterling, the man who will soon be part of our family." Applause rolled through the guests, genuine, admiring. Jack smiled modestly, the way men accustomed to praise learn to do. My mother continued, her words flowing as though she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. "Jack is a Navy SEAL, one of the bravest men you'll ever meet. He's been all over the world protecting our freedom, doing things most of us can't even imagine, and now he's chosen our Sarah." She paused, letting the moment settle, her eyes bright with pride. "I always knew my girl would find someone extraordinary." Then, almost as an afterthought, she glanced in my direction. "Of course, Evelyn is in the Navy too," she added, her tone shifting to something lighter, almost playful. "She does something with computers, very important in its own way, I'm sure." A few polite chuckles rose from the crowd, not cruel but not kind either, and I felt the familiar warmth creep up my neck. It wasn't new, that little jab wrapped in affection, but it landed the same way it always had, like a small stone dropped into still water, the ripples spreading long after the splash. I kept my expression neutral, the way I had learned to do in briefings where admirals twice my age questioned my recommendations. I took a sip of my club soda and waited for the moment to pass. Jack moved through the room, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. I watched him from my quiet corner the way I watched everything, carefully, without appearing to. He was younger than I had expected, maybe 34 or 35, with the kind of fitness born of necessity rather than vanity. His eyes swept the crowd the way mine did, cataloging exits, faces, and potential threats, even at a garden party full of civilians. When Sarah finally brought him over to meet me, she did it with the breezy confidence of someone introducing a celebrity to a distant cousin. "Jack, this is my sister, Evelyn. Evie, Jack." She smiled brightly, already half-turned to greet someone else. Jack extended his hand, polite and warm. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." That was when our eyes met properly for the first time. I saw recognition flash across his face, quick as lightning, gone almost before it registered. His posture shifted by the slightest degree, shoulders squaring, chin lifting just enough that only someone trained to notice would catch it. The glass in his other hand, bourbon, 2 fingers, 1 ice cube, slipped from his grasp and shattered against the travertine floor with a sharp crack that cut through the string quartet like a gunshot. Heads turned, conversations faltered, and Jack Sterling, decorated Navy SEAL, national hero, snapped to perfect attention right there in my mother's garden room and rendered a salute so crisp it would have passed inspection on any base in the world. "Admiral Carter," he said, his voice steady and loud enough that the sudden silence carried it to every corner of the room. "Ma'am, you could have heard a rose petal fall." My mother's face drained of color beneath her carefully applied foundation, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Sarah stared at Jack as if he had suddenly begun speaking in tongues. The string quartet missed a beat, then quietly stopped playing altogether. I felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward me, their weight almost physical, pressing in from all sides, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to stage fright. But I had spent 2 decades commanding rooms full of people who could end wars with a keystroke. I didn't let it show. I returned the salute calmly, then let my hand fall. "At ease, Commander," I said, keeping my voice low but clear. Jack relaxed, though only slightly, his eyes still fixed on mine with the respect drilled into him through years of service. I turned toward the room, meeting my mother's stunned gaze, Sarah's open-mouthed shock, and the curious, confused faces of guests who had never imagined me as anything more than the quiet sister standing in the corner. "I'm sorry for the interruption," I said, my tone even, almost conversational. "Most of you know me as Evelyn Carter, Sarah's older sister who works with computers. That's the cover I've maintained for many years, for very good reasons." I paused, letting the words settle. "My actual rank is Rear Admiral. I serve as Director of Cyber Warfare for Naval Intelligence. My work is highly classified, and for operational security, my identity is protected at the highest levels. That includes protection from my own family." I looked at my mother then, really looked at her, and saw something flicker across her face that might have been fear or shame, or both. "Commander Sterling recognized me from the chain of command displays at his operational base," I continued. "He reacted appropriately." I turned back to Jack, perhaps with a touch more drama than strictly necessary. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, breaking the tension just enough for people to breathe again. Sarah found her voice first. "Evie, what? You're an admiral?" The word sounded foreign in her mouth, as if she were testing it and finding it didn't fit. My mother still hadn't moved. I nodded once. "Yes, for the last 4 years. Before that, I was a captain for 6. I could have listed the commendations, the operations, the nights I didn't sleep because the stakes were too high, but there was no point. They wouldn't have understood, and I didn't need them to. My work requires absolute discretion," I went on, "not just for my safety, but for the safety of everyone who serves under me, including Commander Sterling." Jack inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. The silence that followed was different now, heavier, charged with the realization of how completely they had misjudged me. I felt no triumph in it, only a quiet sadness that this was how they had to learn. My mother finally spoke, her voice thin. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" There was real hurt there, beneath the shock, and for a moment I almost softened, but I had spent too many years swallowing small hurts to offer comfort now. "Because I couldn't," I said simply, "and because the Navy asked me not to. Lives depend on that secrecy. Mine, my team's, and sometimes the lives of men like Jack who operate in the field." I looked around the room one last time, at the faces that had smiled politely at my mother's gentle mockery only minutes earlier, now staring at me with something closer to awe. Tonight changes things. My identity has been publicly compromised in a civilian setting. That creates risk. I'll need to report this incident, and protocols will be followed. I paused, feeling the weight of what came next. For operational security, I will need to limit contact with civilian family members indefinitely. My mother made a small sound, almost a gasp, but I kept my gaze steady. It's not a choice, it's a requirement. Sarah reached for my arm, her eyes filling. "Evie, no, you can't just—" I stepped back gently, out of her reach. "I can," I said, "and I must." I turned to Jack. "Commander, thank you for your service, and congratulations on your engagement." He nodded, still visibly processing the collision of his professional and personal worlds. I looked at my mother one last time. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way." Then I walked through the parted crowd, past the broken glass and spilled bourbon, out the side door I had come in through, and into the cool night air. It felt like the first real breath I had taken in years. The months that followed were strange, like living in the quiet after a long storm. There were debriefings, security reviews, and hushed conversations with people whose names are never spoken aloud. My cover was adjusted, new protocols established, but the essential truth remained. My family could no longer be part of my daily life. Sarah tried to reach out at first. Texts, voicemails, a long email I read 3 times before deleting without replying. My mother sent a single handwritten letter written on thick cream stationery, the kind she used for thank you notes after dinner parties. I left it unopened on my desk for a week before filing it away. Not out of cruelty, but because opening it would have meant stepping back into a story I had finally closed. I moved through my days with a lightness I hadn't known I was missing. Mornings began with secure briefings in windowless rooms. Afternoons were filled with strategy sessions, where my opinion carried the weight it had earned. Evenings were sometimes spent alone in my apartment overlooking the Potomac, watching lights scatter across the water like fallen stars. The work was still hard, still relentless, but it was mine in a way nothing else ever had been. People saluted me because they knew what I could do, not because of who my sister was marrying or how photogenic my life looked from the outside. Respect came wrapped in competence, delivered without fanfare, and I found that I slept better than I had in decades. A year later, almost to the day, I stood on the deck of a carrier during night operations, watching flight crews move like dancers beneath red lights, the ocean stretching black and endless around us. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a secure message, nothing urgent. I thought about the engagement party sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with the gentle distance you feel toward old photographs. I thought about Jack's salute, the shattering glass, my mother's face draining of color, but mostly I thought about the silence that followed when I walked out, the way the night air had felt cool against my skin, like forgiveness I hadn't known I was waiting for. The real victory wasn't the moment everyone finally saw me. It was the quiet morning weeks later when I realized I no longer measured myself against their expectations. It was the knowledge that I could stand in a room full of the most powerful people in intelligence and know my voice mattered, not because of who I knew or how I looked saying it, but because of what I brought to the table. It was the slow, steady realization that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's the people who trust you with their lives in the dark. I still send cards to Sarah and my mother on holidays, brief, neutral notes routed through official channels, screened before delivery. I don't expect replies, and I don't wait for them. Some distances are necessary, like bulkheads that keep a ship from flooding when one compartment is breached. I built mine carefully with the same precision I bring to everything else, and I have never regretted it. Out here, where the work is real and the stakes are clear, I am exactly who I need to be. No apologies, no explanations required, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the little girl who once hid in her room reading books about codes and distant wars grew up to become the woman who writes the codes that keep those wars from reaching our shores. And if, sometimes late at night, I wonder what my mother tells her friends now when they ask about her older daughter, I let the thought drift away like smoke. The truth is, I no longer need to know. The ocean keeps moving beneath the ship, vast, dark, and patient. I lean against the rail and watch the wake glowing faintly behind us, a silver path that disappears almost as soon as it forms. And I think that's what freedom feels like, not a dramatic revelation beneath crystal chandeliers, but this steady forward motion of a life finally aligned with its own compass, leaving old currents behind without looking back.